Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. This week is part 2 of a 2-part series looking at intensity and how to raise and lower your own intensity to gain an advantage in a sparring match. This week we look at raising the intensity to put pressure on your opponent. So if that's something that you're interested in, stay with us for this one. Yeah, I can jump to it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So we're going to look at raising the intensity today and pushing things a little bit higher up than last week's video. So what we originally looked last week is how to bring that intensity down, and there's certain points where you need that. But also we're going to now look at how to raise the intensity, where there will be sometimes in a match, in particular in a competition, where that will be particularly important. But if, as you can see here, the poll that we did put out, most people want to live in that more relaxed intensity. So 2/3 more or less. So ideally, that means if you're somebody who can live at that higher intensity, you're going to probably have a bigger advantage. And I think particularly what we see, Adrian, is usually people who live at this higher intensity really have a big advantage in the second round towards the last minute, let's say. And that's kind of their time to shine.
Yeah, it kind of puts pressure on two facets. I suppose your own conditioning and your ability to last in that high intensity kind of environment. You know, are you conditioned enough to go the 4 minutes with that? But the second thing, and I think it's important not to understate that, is just concentration wise. So the person who's pushing that higher intensity, if they can maintain their concentration and focus, it's going to create cracks and holes in the other person's game as they then struggle to maintain their concentration and their effort at an intensity that they're not used to training or practicing at. So I think being the person who forces that higher intensity really does very often create an advantage for you.
Yeah, because it's those simple decisions in the dying moments is what comes down to the difference between people at that higher level, usually, who are kind of similar in their skill set. So other than that, what are the other reasons that we're looking to raise the intensity? Maybe very simply, you're at the end of a match and you're looking to push it because you're down on the scoreboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, it's about creating, changes in momentum as well. So sometimes you'll push for a score, but then by maintaining your momentum and continuing to increase the intensity, you can often get, the other kind of precipitating things that lead to an advantage in the match. So you get a score, you get more ring position, you push your opponent out perhaps and they get a warning, or you get a score and you get to follow immediately with another score, which, creates that big change on the scoreboard. So adding intensity in those moments is a huge thing to really, really shift the flow of the match in your favor. And again, there are key moments. So you're talking about, just before the break or maybe just towards the end of the match where, people are more conscious and more aware of the scoreboard, and it's a chance to maybe step something up and make a change on that scoreboard.
Yeah. So let's look first at how bouncing and maybe your stance impacts this, because this is something that a lot of people use as their step one to raise the intensity. So we can see Danilo here as well as Alamine actually are both quite active on the feet, and that just naturally raises the intensity of the match. Now just the heart rate increases that little bit more, and people are a little bit more kind of attuned to what could happen. They're not as switched off mentally. Now I know you might say it's hard to switch off when you're in a physical competition with
For
somebody
sure.
else, but there are levels to it at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, what we're seeing is the body weight dropping a little lower, a little bit more rapid in the bouncing, and a little bit more of the test stepping, which is trying to pick up that reaction from the opponent. And, both guys are still picking shots and so on, but you can see when they go from that higher relaxed bounce into a lower, tighter bounce, and one responds to the other as well, which is one of the other advantages that we have, in terms of setting the intensity, whether higher or lower, is that if you're setting it and the other person follows you, we always have something of an advantage.
Yeah, so it's either they come and match you exactly, or else you try to do the opposite to them. So yeah, the person who leads the dance usually is the person with the advantage. So we see here is a little bit of a difference where Julio kind of usually has a bit more relaxed, kind of a rhythmic bounce, where Rustic in the red here, he's very, very intense on the feet, because a big part of his game is trying to get to that blitz. So I think that that bouncing and the higher intensity of it links very well with people who are able to engage with the hands and get in
Yeah.
quite well there into an entry.
Yeah, and then we continuing on that entry, we did look at distance last week, and weirdly, this is something that I think in both cases you can make the distance bigger to lower the intensity, but you can also change the intensity by being closer. Here we're looking at raising the intensity a little bit by creating pressure on your opponent, forcing them to take an action so that you can create that extra pressure. But it can work the other way as well. You can be quite settled on your feet and step in and be close and lower the intensity. Here again, Bartosz, and I think it's Danilo on this one as well.
Yeah.
That even though he's taking a shot on this one, it does let him close the distance, push Danilo into the corner, and in this it's just squeezing, encouraging Danilo to pull the trigger so Bartek can be the first one to the hand. And that space pressure, no matter what, when your opponent is a few inches closer to you, you'll feel that intensity, you'll feel the pressure.
Yeah, it's like the walls closing in on you.
It is.
Essentially, and just making the ring smaller. But I think you hit the nail on the head there by mentioning that it's like patient pressure on the stepping and the footwork, and gradually squeezing the space. It's not something that you do very intense, because of course they're going to recognize that and bail out pretty quickly. So it has to be almost kind of something that happens without them noticing, just that kind of like gradual kind of nudging in towards their space.
Exactly. I kind of went from there into the ring craft as well, just because that's very much the same idea. It creates that space pressure. And it's one of the things that, a lot of people look at our big open rings and it feels like you have so much room and sure you can always step out. But the fact is you can't, and the corners of the ring are very tight places that force you to make bad decisions, if you get stuck there. And the warnings eventually build up on the scoreboard. So here we're looking at Norway keeping Antti from Finland stuck in the corners and really tracking him and creating a little bit of pressure, which is letting him get in for those attempted scores.
Yeah, that's a big part of it as well, because you can't really raise the intensity when somebody has plenty of space behind them to run to and avoid and move and reset back in the centre.
Good point.
So yeah, you need to close the space to build the intensity, otherwise they're just going to run, and most guys at the higher level aren't going to get caught with big open shots.
No, yeah, you won't get the person directly with your first intention unless you're unless the distance is quite close. And again, we're seeing this the accidental travel, focusing on the shot that's coming in front of you, and the feet just glide out of the ring.
Yeah, I think that this trampoline springboard effect sidekick Julio uses is a nice way to build intensity. Just being able to kind of not settle on the single shot. He's able to drop, push, and use the floor to gain momentum to get really explosive and be a real threat. And
here we see it from the girls with Sarah. So she's taken the defensive sidekick on the way in, but Erska has kind of conceded the warning. And again, it's kind of the maintenance of pressure from here.
Yeah, that's it. Like, you need to be able to build up and do shot after shot, essentially, because intensity isn't going to come from just like one burst. It's going to be kind of like a gradual pressure cooker kind of a vibe where this person is eventually going to have to crumble. So that's kind of the idea. You don't want it just to be a once off. As you can see, Sarah's piling on the pressure here, and that's the idea.
Yeah, so bring it back. We talk about that, that continuation. So the intensity can come from not taking the foot off the gas.
Yeah, so it's basically similar to what we said last week of lowering the intensity by looking for single shots. Here we're looking for continuations and not settling. So you're literally waiting until the referee calls Hecho, or basically until something else happens where the match needs to stop. But you're the one that's putting that pressure on. Going back to Neil Ernest again, what he liked to say is being first in and last out. So we can see a nice way to do that as well here is angles and re-engaging. So that's something that we covered in blitz variations and how to score different shots on the continuation. So go check that video out as well if you haven't.
Yeah, and I mean, all of this is kind of, it's stopping the referee in some cases as well from being able to interfere with the match and pause the match. And we get very, very used to in ITF the match happening in short bursts, interrupted by a referee. When it doesn't go that way and there isn't a break, that you can start to feel that additional pressure then.
Yeah, it's something that we kind of like haven't really spoke about in a big broad sense in terms of people who like have a chat about the game of sparring, but it is something that the high level guys seem to do a lot. Engage, pull angles, pull exits, and then re-engage again.
Yeah,
That continuation, it can be happen where it's a continuous flow forward, or like we said, and we just seen in the last two clips, where you disengage on purpose to re-engage again.
definitely. And I mean, in general, more actions is a big thing. But like, I think what's important to point out here is when you look at the shot selection from people who we have in these clips, what you're not seeing, for the most part here, is a direct stopping side kick and what's happening next. So when we were talking about lowering the intensity, the shots, a back kick, a front hand, a long punch, and a side kick were great shots at creating separation, lowering the intensity. And what we're seeing here as we go into these couple of clips is, certainly a lot more turning kick and a lot more hands.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier to flow from one to the other, I think, isn't it?
Exactly.
There are certain shots there that you can use which kind of naturally help your forward momentum based on the stance you use, and of course then as well linking up hands and the legs together, which is a vital part. Yeah, I think these few clips here from Maskimenko, I think, is it?
Yeah,
and yeah. You never see him throw a single shot. It's shots in bunches, and I think that's a big part of the intensity, of course.
Yeah, whereas we can see here for Rossi to get in more actions, he's having to drop foot, go again, and it's there are certainly more actions as he's trying to raise the intensity, but it's in far more single shots, and they don't create quite the same pressure on Julio in because of how they're coming in there. But if you are in a side fighting stance and that is your preferred style, you don't necessarily have the option to open up that back leg and bring the turning kick in. But the advantage of having that more half facing style is easier to get to hands and easier to connect both legs. So I suppose that's the base of it. And leading on from there, just a busy front leg. I mean, it sounds really, really simple, but it's quite popular now as a way to just simply get the intensity going.
Yeah, because we've seen that as well in a lot of recent clips, that it's a big feature of like the modern game of ITF sparring, that people are using that front leg to set everything else up. But yeah, like linking in the springboard one we've seen from Julio, and linking up different variations and levels as well. I think that's a key, and what it does is it opens up other shots, because somebody will eventually make a mistake or make an error. Linking back to what we said at the start of the show about the conditioning and the mental decisions and the mental fatigue, I think that it comes down to building that pressure, and then eventually somebody makes a little bit of an error, and that makes an opening.
Absolutely. And all of that was kind of hinging on something that we want to talk about over on the member side today, which is the conditioning. That if you want to be someone who's going to force the intensity of the match and and really rely on that higher intensity, you cannot do that just with a mental flick of the switch. You have to be conditioned to do that. So what are we going to talk about over on this side?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to look at how conditioning impacts all of that, and what you can do to improve your specific conditioning, because a lot of people think you go out and run the roads and you kind of build your conditioning in an overall capacity, but you need to be specific in your conditioning training as well. So we're going to get involved there on the member side. If you want to get involved in the member side, look for the join button on our channel and get involved there. You can see all the videos that we've done to date. They're all together in a playlist, and we can give you a look at how you can structure your training to build this intensity. But regardless whether you want it to high intensity or low intensity, conditioning is a major part of being able to compete at the high level.
Well, as we just said there, if your opponent is forcing the match to a higher intensity and you haven't got the capacity to respond, you've just kind of conceded one of the major factors to them. So you want to be able to do it even if it's not your preference, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it's something that you can control beforehand. You want to have that box ticked before you go into a competition, and not leave that kind of be an issue or a doubt in your head, because we know that the mental side then as well, and the confidence that gives you.
Yeah, for sure. So that's us on this topic for this week. Next week, we're going back to have a little bit of a look at some competition sparring, just from a complete analysis of the match and the event point of view. So a little bit of a treat in store next week, and a little bit of a slanty angle at this one, I think it's fair to say. So if you're curious about that, join us next Friday and we'll get back to a bit of match analysis.
All right. So we'll see you in the next one.
See you next time.